When I first started teaching beginners, I did the shaker egg method for vibrato. And the way I sequenced it, the beginners were always learning vibrato around Easter time, so we had the Easter eggs around, and you'd fill them up with rice and put them together, and it was kind of a disaster. The students were like, "What's inside?" Like, they were so curious about what's inside. I just said, it's rice. That's all that's in there is rice, just plain uncooked white rice. But they had to know, so they busted open the eggs and rice would get everywhere. It was a mess. So the next year, I took 2-part epoxy, which can hold up hundreds of pounds, and I sealed all of the eggs shut with 2-part epoxy. And certainly the students wouldn't be able to break those apart and find the rice, would they? Nope, they found a way to do it. So over the years, I just got annoyed with the shaker egg thing, and I developed different vibrato technique that I think is better suitable towards my students. Maybe give some of them a shot and see if they're good for yours. So the idea is that we want to deconstruct this technique into its basic elements. We want to figure out what is moving where and start from the simplest component to the largest component. Instead of starting from the largest and then learning about the simplest later, we think about the simplest, from small to big. Once we figure out what those movements are, we want to isolate the movements and get the students to start working on the little movements first and then adding on to those movements as they're progressing and staging through the vibrato. Another challenge is adding the bow to the vibrato, where all of a sudden it becomes a bimanual activity, meaning that both hands are doing something completely separate. Like the tapping the head and rubbing the tummy type of deal. It can be very confusing, so it's always good to isolate the left hand first, and then once they're comfortable with that, start adding the bow, because I guarantee you their left hands can look great, and then once you add the bow, it's a disaster. So I've created a technique series on how to stage the vibrato from the fingertip to the moment arm to the upper part of the hand, finally to the wrist, to get everything moving in motion. The other advantage of staging is so that when something breaks down in the process of vibrato, you can identify where it is and then go over that sequence again to build up that skill, so that they can play with beautiful vibrato. It's also important to remember that vibrato takes a long time to learn. It doesn't happen overnight. They're not going to be perfect at it right away. This takes days, weeks, months to start to develop into something they can actually start to use. So make sure everybody has realistic expectations going in. The last thing you want to do is rush the process and start developing bad habits, because bad habits are harder to fix. So slow it down, be patient, and again, remember your values that you have and that you've established in your program, and that hopefully will get your students to be able to put up with more technique work so that they can play with beautiful vibrato. Another key point is to make sure that your students have that growth mindset, because they're not going to perfect it in one day. You just try to get them a little bit better every day, just 1% better every day. It adds up, it adds up, it adds up, and before you know it, you have beautiful vibrato.